Welcome back to the Lawfather Podcast. As always, we're here in Lawfather headquarters in the podcast studio. And, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Your feedback is always appreciated, good and bad. And follow us on all of our social media. Those of you following along on Instagram Live and maybe even watching the video on Instagram later, appreciate all of you. And let's get started with a little bit of a follow-up, if you will. Follow-up, but not necessarily truly a follow-up per se. Last week we talked about the gambling bill or the gambling contract and how that could come to pass. And we talked about that the legislative session had ended and there was a special session last week. And that special session was just for the gambling contract to see if it could be ratified, which it was. So there are some hurdles now on the federal level that have to be crossed. The Department of the Interior, which is a division of the federal government, will take a look at it, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of legal challenges. So probably something to follow as we look into the future. But to kind of parlay off of that, I want to look into how does something become law, and not necessarily like the gambling compact, because that's a really unique thing, right? The whole concept behind how that comes about is its own separate thing, okay? What I want to look into is the laws that we have. How do they come about, and how do they get there, right? What is the process that is used for a concept or an idea to become a law, all right? So here's how it works, right? So you start with this thought, okay? And we'll use a real life example, and we'll use one that has been really pertinent to us as a personal injury law firm, is the repealing of the PIP law. Okay, so this would have actually been, how did this law come about, and then how were they changing the law? It would have been it's one and the same type process. Okay, so you have a citizen or a group. So think maybe a lobbyist or a special interest group, or a legislator may have an idea or a thought or wanting to do something. So that's where it starts, and it then gets pushed to a representative. So obviously, if it's a representative's idea, they can take and they can pitch it themselves. If it's just an individual, or if it's a group, obviously it needs to get to one of the elected, whether it's the House of Representatives or Senate. All right. So before we get too deep into it, either House in Florida can introduce a bill. So the House of Representatives can introduce a bill, and the Senate can introduce a bill. All right. It really doesn't matter. Either one can start the process. All right. And those people who are in those positions are elected by the citizens of Florida. So the representative introduces the bill, and that bill then gets drafted. And how does it get drafted? Well, they actually have a drafting service, a bill drafting service that is used to write and review all bills. And these things, they're generally long, all right? Generally written by lawyers. I would estimate that most, or at least the majority of your elected officials are lawyers. I know that there generally is kind of the career path, right? So lawyers like to put a lot of things in. They like to use a lot of words and make things really long and complicated, to the point that I read some of these things and I go, I don't really understand what the heck you were trying to do. Why are we making this so complicated? Right? Look at the IRS code. Try to figure that out. So anyway, that it's written, and then it gets a number and is filed. Okay? And so it then moves, like I said, it can be in either house. So it starts in one. So let's say this bill starts in the House of Representatives. There's what's called a first reading, and it has to be read out to the full House, And it's usually done, the first reading is usually done by publication in the journal. And the journal is something for the House of Representatives. And it's then referred by the Speaker. It's referred to a committee, a subcommittee, or a calendar of the House. Right? So it's not that it goes to the full House for a vote. There's a lot of steps in this process. Right? So you hear it all the time. You hear these subcommittees, right? There's various different ones. There's all different types. Now, this subcommittee is then going to look at that bill and make one of three determinations. And this is one of the few places where the process somewhat differs, not necessarily in process, but in names between the House of Representatives and the Senate. So the three options, if it's a bill introduced by the House, is that the committee or subcommittee marks it as favorably. All right, it moves on. Number two option is it's favorably with recommended committee or subcommittee substitute, meaning they made some changes to it, but they're good with it based on those changes. It moves on. The next, unfavorably. All right, pretty self-explanatory. The Senate follows the same thing, but they call it a little something different. Okay, they have favorably, which moves it on. They have favorably with amendments. Why they feel like they need to have favorably with recommended committee or subcommittee substitute and favorably with amendments, considering it means the same thing. I'm not really sure, but hey, we are long on tradition when we're talking about the legislature. So, and then number three, we have unfavorably, right? Once again, still self-explanatory. That's about the only place that you see a difference. All right. So it's then placed, if it is either option one or option two, favorably, or we'll just call it favorably with changes, right? To kind of encompass both of them. It moves on to a House calendar, and the Rules and Policy Committee may place a bill on a special order calendar for a consideration in the chamber. It is then read, it then has its second reading. And then after that, it has its third reading, right? It is then voted on, and if it's passed, it goes to the opposite house. So if we're working in the House of Representatives with this example, it moves on to the Senate Secretary. And the Senate then follows the same process. Except for the idea part in the beginning. They just take that bill that the House has sent over to them, and they read it, and they send it to a subcommittee, and that subcommittee favorably with changes, or unfavorably moves it through. Second reading, third reading, vote. Okay? Now, the Senate can then return it to the House with changes, right? And so if we use a little bit of the example that we talked about in the beginning, the repeal of the PIP statute here in Florida and how that came about, that one started in the Senate, and then the House went through the process. So it passed the Senate, right? 1, 2, 3 reading, subcommittee, vote, goes to the House of Representatives. And the House of Representatives made changes, right? They made amendments to it. And then it got sent back to the Senate to try to reconcile those changes, right? So as we move through, if it doesn't have any amendments, so the process comes to a V here. If there's no amendments, and it passes the Senate, right? In our example, we started with the House, passed the House, then it passed the Senate, then it goes to the governor, right? The governor can do one of three things, and it's kind of interesting. And, it's essentially, I guess you could say politics at work, but the governor can sign the bill, the governor can refuse to sign the bill, or the governor can veto the bill, right? So what happens in those situations? Well, if the governor signs the bill, that's the easiest. It becomes law. Done. Game over. It is now a law. The House has passed it, the Senate has passed it, and the governor has signed off. If the governor does not sign the bill, it then goes to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State enacts it as law, right? So Option 1 and option 2 have the same result. Okay, so even though the governor doesn't sign off on a bill, and as we were talking about in option 2, it has an expiration date, and it's a little bit convoluted, but just keep in mind that there is an expiration date. It's a short period. It's one of those where if this happens and this happens, then it's this time, and if that happens and that happens, then it's another time. Really not anything that we need to worry about. But as we're talking about signing of things, just know that you can actually go on the state of Florida websites and see which bills are up for signing and how they have become law or how they've been vetoed, right, in terms of what the governor did. So if the governor just lets it sit on his desk, right, and we'll use him because we have a male governor, DeSantis, right now, but if we had a female governor, you could sit on her desk. But either way, it sits on the governor's desk, and the governor goes, I'm not signing it because, wow, hey, that bill, hey, that's a political firestorm. If I sign it, I'm going to make people mad. If I don't sign it, I'm going to make, a same number of people equally as mad. So I'm just going to let it sit here, right? And let the legislature deal with the blowback, right? So then it expires and it goes to the Secretary of State and it still becomes law, okay? Now, the only other choice, rather, that the governor has is to veto the bill, right? So if a governor goes, I just don't like that bill, and I don't want that bill to pass. I don't want it as part of law. Vetoes it, signs off, veto. It then can actually go back, and with a 2/3 vote of the House and of the Senate, it can actually become law, right? Without the governor's signature. It overrides the governor's veto, okay? So that's what that is. That's how it can come about. So even though the governor has a lot of power in signing or not signing a bill, if they veto a bill, it can still be overridden. 2/3 vote is a lot, and actually you can track all of it, right? So you can actually see what bills have come up in a given session, and you can see how the votes went, right? So if we use the PIP part as an example, if the governor had vetoed it, most likely it still would have passed, right? And by the PIP part, I mean the PIP repeal that we've talked about a couple of times. The votes were there. I didn't do the actual math on it, but based on what I could see, it was pretty overwhelming. It appeared to be far more than 2/3 voted for, both in the Senate and in the House, voted for the repeal. I couldn't find it. Okay, I couldn't find the status of it. So seemingly it got pulled from the governor's desk somehow. I don't know. That's beyond above my pay grade, if you will. But be that as it may, you can see what a bill has done and then when it got to the governor's desk. So if a governor vetoes a bill, you can start to make some assumptions as to if that bill will actually pass in a veto vote. All right. So that's what happens if there's no amendments. If there are amendments to it, so we went through that whole process with the House, it went to the Senate. The Senate made some amendments to it. If the House of Representatives goes, hey, yeah, we're okay with the Senate amendments, same process, goes to the governor for signature, just like we talked about. It could go back and forth. It could get passed back and forth with amendments until both sides have something that they agree with. And that is how a bill becomes law. Now, when does a bill become effective? The official language of it is a law becomes effective on the 60th day after signed die or on a specified date or upon the governor's signature. All right. I believe it's usually July 1st or January 1st here in the state of Florida. I believe those are the dates that are usually used in the state of Florida. So that is how a bill becomes a law, right? There's your little precursor. I really, truth be told, I really didn't know the process until I started looking it up for today, and I figured working in this industry and being impacted by different laws and different legislature decisions, that if I didn't know, there was probably a lot of people out there who didn't know the full process and exactly how it works. So that is how it works. Now, just want to transition a little bit from laws to it's not necessarily quote unquote listener question, but it's something that comes up from time to time, and it has to do with laws, and it has to do with another branch of the government. Okay. And it's something that came up when I was on DJ Eakin's show recently, and it's something we talked about it. And it's a concept that I think collectively, the more we talked about it, and we had a pretty candid conversation, even though the show's not quote unquote live, it's taped live, right? And I don't believe any edits were made to no, and Jason's shaking his head. No, no edits were made to our very candid conversation. And one of the things that came from it is, how can we enact some change in it when it comes to interaction with law enforcement, right? And those of you who listen know that my background's in law enforcement, and I may look at things from a little bit different perspective because I've been on the other side of it. I can see both sides. I've been on that side where you have somebody that's telling you, no, they're not going to do something, and you start to question the why, right? Because you don't know. The problem is you don't know what's going on as an officer, right? You don't know what's going on in that other person's head. You don't know anything about that person, most likely. Okay, there are times that you may know some things, and that may either help or hurt the situation, right? But that not knowing is what can make things difficult, because as an officer, your alert gets heightened, right? All of a sudden, right? And there is some kind of percentage on this that tells the they call it yes people and no people, right? And there is, I want to say, when I was working in law enforcement, it was like 1 or 2% of the people were no people, meaning that if you told somebody to do something 98% of the time, 98, 99% of the time, they would do it, okay? And when you had that 1 or 2%, it kind of messed with your head. And I think that's what gets lost here in this, is we're still dealing with people, right, on both sides of it. But anyway, I digress from what I'm truly getting to. And what we had talked about was this. And those of you on Instagram Live, I'm going to show you, and those of you who are going to watch later on the video, this is a card. It has the Lawfather, kind of matches the guy behind me. All right. But what's the more important part is the part on the other side. Okay. And this is, I think, step one in what Eakin and I had talked about on that show. And it was, hey, maybe you're not sure what to do, right? Or maybe you just need a reminder, or maybe it's just easier to have something that you can hand off, right? That you can hand off to the officer that says, hey, I have a lawyer. I'm not talking to you. And guess what? You can't search my car. All right. It's at least a start. All right. I'm not saying that there's any one true fix to this. And I'm not saying either side is to blame for some of the things. Now, look, are there some bad people on both sides? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. It's just, you're dealing with people, and there's always going to be good people, and there's always going to be bad people. Right. But anyway, so I'll show you the back side of the card. I'm not sure, those of you on Instagram Live, you may be able to see it. Those of you who are going to be following along on the podcast on YouTube later, you may not be able to see it. But what it says is, I want to speak to my lawyer. I do not consent to any search. If I am not under arrest, let me go. Okay. It's pretty simple. The idea is we want to take that animosity out. We want to take that kind of that fight out, right? That tone, the anything else, right? It's just words on a piece of paper, right? It's just saying, hey, look, I have a lawyer, and I'm not going to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you. I have a right to. Miranda, okay? Miranda's actually a guy's last name. It was Miranda v. Arizona. It's a Supreme Court case. That's why it's called Miranda rights. But because prior to that, which, I mean, I think that was the 60s or 70s. It wasn't all that long ago. It's been a long time since I've actually looked at that particular piece of case law. But prior to that, you really didn't have a right. You really didn't have a right to an attorney, and they could pretty much do whatever they wanted. Not that they could do whatever they wanted, but you could be coerced in the statements, essentially. And what the Supreme Court came through, and that it was said you can't, right? Now it has to be custodial. And that's the importance here, right? And I think that's what a lot of people don't know, is that if you're free to go, right? The police can ask you anything. And people don't know that. They think they have to answer. But you can actually incriminate yourself, and Miranda doesn't apply if you're free to go. Miranda only applies to custodial interviews. And an interview can be as simple as a single question. But if you're not free to leave the situation, then that single question counts as a custodial interview. So anyway, we have these cards in the office. As far as what to do if you get stopped, look, be compliant. Hey, license, registration, insurance. Give them the license, registration, insurance. They ask you to get out of the car. The Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, has said over and over again that it does not matter the reason. It does not matter the why. If an officer tells you to get out of the car, you have to get out of the car. Okay? What makes things interesting on the other side of it is when you ask somebody to get out of the car and they go, no. Okay? Or they start moving around or fidgeting or start reaching, and it just, that's where things tend to go bad. Okay? So I would say this. Call me up, stop by the office, grab one of these cards. These cards are plastic, okay? And what I'll do is if you come by the office for one of these cards or hit me up to have us send you one of these, I'll actually give you two. These they're plastic. They'll sit in your wallet. Just put it right with your license or your ID card, right? And if you get stopped and they say, hey, let me see your license, you just pull this out along with your license and you have it. So you can give one to a buddy if you get one and you need another one, just let me know. I'll give you another one. But it is meant to help diffuse the situation. Okay, don't make a situation worse, right? Let them know you want to speak to your lawyer. You don't consent to any search. And if you're not under arrest, let me go. All right, so that is the podcast for today. Let me know if you want one of these cards, 855 Lawfather, call or text. Stop by my office, 202 South Rome Avenue, Suite 150. All right, I'm here all the time. So come in and see us. More than happy to see you, talk to you, anything else. And I know we're going to be working on part 2 of the plan at some point between Eakin and I. Our schedules are pretty busy, and sometimes it's tough to match up. But we've talked about wanting to come up with a step 2. So hopefully we're able to do that. But this is a start. Like I said, hit me up, call me, text me, and we'll go from there. Anyway, that is the Lawfather Podcast for today. Check us out on all the social media avenues. All right, TikTok. Yeah, TikTok. It's kind of fun. Instagram, doing some more reels here and there, so check those out as well. As always, the podcast will be on YouTube, and that is the show for today. Lawfather, out.